Welcome to the Living Out podcast, helping people, churches and society talk about faith and sexuality.
Hello and welcome to the Living Out podcast. I'm afraid it's Ed again. I've been allowed, can you believe it, to host 4 episodes in a row. And the bad news is this is only the second of those 4, so you're stuck with me for a while. And the reason it's me is because in this series of the Living Out podcast, we're exploring themes for my recent book, The Intimacy Deficit, available at all good Christian bookshops and online too. But thankfully for you, the aim of this series is not just to hear me speak. Instead, it's to hear from more people than just me. Our aim through this series on the intimacy deficit is to get different perspectives, stories, when it comes to enjoying intimacy. And you'll know already that the 4 categories we're particularly thinking about are intimacy with creation, connectedness with creation, intimacy with others, intimacy with God, and today's focus is on intimacy with yourself. Now, in case there's anybody sniggering out there as they hear talk of intimacy with yourself, it's important to state, as we've kept on stating throughout this series, that intimacy is not all about sex. And so intimacy yourself is not sexual. This is not an episode on masturbation. Instead, we're going to be talking about feeling at ease in our own skins. Feeling connected to the different bodies, personalities, strengths and weaknesses that God has in his grace given each of us. But before we talk about that, it's time to introduce the other occupants of this virtual podcast recording studio, who are 2 good friends of mine. Guest number 1 is a familiar voice, our own Andrew Bunt, Living Out's Emerging Generations Director. Let's just check he is there and conscious. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, I'm here. I am largely conscious.
Good, that is reassuring for all our listeners. And guest number 2 is an old-timer, a Living Out storyteller, and someone who has made me laugh more than has been wise at times. Jeanette Howard, are you there ready to make me laugh again?
Well, this old-timer feels left behind in, I don't know, maybe the Californian gold rush. I'm not sure about being called an old-timer. I was thinking, if Andrew is the beloved Andrew, director of Emerging Generations, can I be honorary director of the declining generation?
Yes, submerging generations is the category we've given it in the past, and you can consider yourself appointed honorary director of submerging generations at this very point, because otherwise it's Andy Robinson that gets the job. There we are.
No,
it's yours. It's yours, Jeanette.
It's mine. I'm sorry.
It's yours. Well done. Good. Okay, well, as we start talking about intimacy with yourself, I'm going to ask Andrew and Jeanette to share something they like about themselves, which might be a helpful indication of how much work we have to do together. So, Jeanette, something that you like about yourself.
This took a long time to think about. In the end, I've decided what I like is that I am content. I have learnt contentment, and that pleases me no end. And it is the simple things that bring contentment and joy, and I'm at that place, so I'm rather delighted. Yeah,
praise God. That's great to hear. Andrew, what do you like about yourself?
Well, when you told us you were going to ask us this, I did think this does illustrate the need of the episode. My first thought was, I don't know what on earth's the answer to that. But actually, encouragingly, it didn't take me long to think, no, there's multiple things I feel I could say. And what I landed on, I think what I'm most grateful for like about myself is I think I genuinely am good at loving people, and I care deeply and like seeking to be a good friend who loves and cares well. And that's something people have commented about me, and I think I can see that in myself. And I'm grateful to God to be able to recognise that and celebrate that.
Oh, that's lovely. One of the things I used to like about myself was the colour of my hair, which used to be this beautiful auburn colour, but it's now faded. And I was just reminded of this last night. We've got this new beautiful little baby in our church family who's got proper red hair. And as I was sitting there, I was looking down at this 1-month-old baby thinking, I used to have lovely hair like you. So that's something I used to like about myself. There are plenty of other things, but we haven't got time for them today. Okay, well, it is so lovely to have Andrew and Jeanette with me. And the first question I've got for you is why did you read The Intimacy Deficit? And I sort of half know the answers, but let's hear why you read The Intimacy Deficit, Jeanette.
You made me.
Yes.
Basically, you said, would I join the podcast? Well, in order to do that, I actually had to buy the book because you didn't provide that either.
Yeah, this is how I'm trying to boost sales of my book by inviting people on a podcast to talk about it. Desperate measures. Andrew, why did you read The Intimacy Deficit?
Well, you didn't make me read it, but you invited me to read the draft and to critique it. And there are a few things I like more in life than getting critique other people's work. So I gladly agreed. But also, it's also true. I think generally the topic kind of resonated with me. I feel like in my own life, I have come to realise the vital role of intimacy. I think I realise how many of the difficulties and struggles in my life have actually been because of a lack of intimacy. And I can see the same in other people's lives as well. And I think what I really like about the book is the breadth you cover, the different forms of intimacy. And it made me realise, even when I looked at the contents page, oh yeah, there's elements of that I've really kind of overlooked and don't think about it. So in part, yes, you asked me to, but also I genuinely think the topic was something I thought, oh, actually, I want to think about that. And I know that will help me and will hopefully help me to help others as well.
Did anything frustrate you about it? I like criticism. So anything frustrate you about The Intimacy Deficit? Go for it, either of you.
No, that is not a word that sprang to mind at all. Because I've heard you speak, some of the stuff, it's like, yes, you'd gathered it together, you put it on the page, absolutely. But I was also very moved at times and challenged, a bit like what Andrew said. You look at that and you get to that point. I think what really struck me was your point on if you don't have friendships, you can't be in leadership. I mean, that's obviously a one sentence précis of what you were saying, but that was the gist I got, which was very challenging for me because I have difficulty in creating and maintaining friendships, and yet I'm in leadership positions. So it actually exposed a lot of stuff that I still need to be working on. So, and I value you. You are a wise man whom I love and value. So, frustration was never a word that sprang up.
I think my frustration with the book is that I'm struggling to put into practice myself.
Yeah, well, that's
the thing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the joy of writing a book, isn't it? It's like, yeah, great. Now can you live it?
Yes, exactly.
And that was my frustration. My frustration actually wasn't about the book in a sense, but about the topic, because there are no quick fixes. And I just read it and I thought, gosh, this takes time and deliberate effort and ongoing working out in life, actually. And I know in general that's a weakness for me. I'm an impatient person. I'm a fast-paced person. I live how I speak almost in that sense. And yeah, there was always frustration of, I can't just quickly fix all the intimacy issues in my life. But also it casts a vision enough to make me think, but it is worthwhile being patient, taking the slow steps to do that. And so you as my friends can keep me accountable, Ed and Jeanette, as to whether I actually do that.
I think on the chapter on friendship, I use the analogy that actually solving the intimacy deficit is rather like gardening. Your job is never done. And actually, that's an analogy. Actually, Jeanette, you can probably confirm whether this is because you actually are a genuine gardener. I was using the illustration of gardening thinking, I know nothing about it. But it's true, isn't it? That our intimacy deficit is a constant work, and just the seasons of life happen around us. We'll constantly be having to work on this.
Absolutely. And the parable of the soils, the good soil and everything, it's only good because as a gardener, you're tending on it, you're bringing goodness into it, you're weeding, you're doing everything. It doesn't stay good if it's neglected. It turns into whatever, a weed patch. And you're right. That's why, Andrew, when you said what I like about myself is that I am invested in people. I do care for people, and all of that, I have to say, is quite alien for me. It does not come naturally to me at all. So it, being a gardener, it's what soils are we in, what conditions, what everything, what do we need to apply, really. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, so intimacy deficit, you've enjoyed the book. It's a lifetime's work for each of us. Let's focus in on intimacy with yourself. We've talked about how that could be misunderstood, how that can make people giggle or worry that we're just talking about sex. What are we talking about when we're talking about intimacy with yourself? Andrew, what would your attempt at sort of explaining this concept?
Well, I like the language I think you've used already in this podcast, and I think you used in the book of feeling comfortable in your own skin. I think that's a kind of idea we can all get our heads around. But two other ways that have helped me think about it. One is being able to be honest with yourself about yourself. I think that's part of actually kind of recognizing who you really are, what you're really like, and being able to be honest about that. Be able to be honest both about the things that you're good at and your strengths and such like, the positive things about you, but also the things that are weaknesses or things that are rough edges that actually, being conformed to the image of Christ, we want to slowly kind of smooth those off or change those. Another one I thought, which maybe is an outworking of that or a nuance of that, is being able to be positive and thankful for yourself, which is only part of it in a sense, but I think it's the bit that probably many of us most struggle with. And I think for me it probably is to be positive and thankful for myself, how I am, how God's made me and stuff. I think has been a battle, is an ongoing battle. And that for me nicely kind of summarises what it would mean to have healthy intimacy with myself, would be to be able to be positive and thankful for who I am, how God's made me, all that kind of stuff.
I don't know who said the phrase first, but being a stranger to myself and unknown, an unexplored person. So really growing up relating, I was a chameleon. It's like, who do you want me to be? And I will be it. You know, whatever you like, I will like too, because of that desire to be loved or known or even have a friendship circle. I'll be who you want me to be. So what happened is that it's an unknown self. And I think when I became a Christian, it was God having to start from the beginning, really, which is no bad thing, but to tell me who I am. Because I had no idea.
And how did God do that? How did God help you get to know who you were and who he'd made you to be when you became a Christian?
Well, you know, obviously reading the Bible, there were so many things he declared in God's word. And for the most part, it was like, no, it's not. No, I'm not. No, that can't be. You know, and that helped me actually form my own thoughts. It's like, what did I, you know, you used Psalm 139, which was a big hater for me. And because you were formed in your mother's womb. And it's like, my relationship with my mother was a non-touchable one. So the thought of being formed in my mother's womb was really quite abhorrent to me. But there was God saying, and you're beautifully and wonderfully made. It's like, no. So I found out who I was by being challenged by God's word. And what I didn't agree with and what I could live with has been that ongoing process, really.
So intimacy with God for you, intimacy with yourself for you has been hearing God speak his truth into your life, into your heart, into your experiences.
Yeah, and choosing to believe it, creating that framework, and then at some point hoping that the emotional response will connect with the truth. It is funny because, you know, people say, oh, I want to be my authentic self. But when you look in the dictionary, the word authentic means as close as possible to the original. And it's like, if we're made in God's image and we have the character of Christ within, there's the authentic self that we're going for. So yeah, God's word was a major component of finding intimacy with myself.
And do you want to talk a little bit about, I think I've heard you speak in the past about how Psalm 139, how you mentioned you sort of hated it originally, but how it has been a companion in your life and how God has used that psalm in particular to help you grow in your intimacy with yourself.
Yeah, I think it's because he's sovereign. I think once it's like you accept God is who he says he is, what he says is trustworthy and true, and what he seeks is your very best. And it's like, okay, within all of that, then you are wonderfully, made, and all of, and it's like, is he sovereign? Yes, he is. Then I choose, now, God, please help me feel that. And that's gone on and on and on, to the point, like I said, my greatest joy at the moment is I am content. But that's taken years of applying ourselves to that.
And I think that nicely brings up a point I make in the book and keep needing to make to myself, is how each of these areas of intimacy reinforce each other. So actually intimacy with yourself is only going to come when you enjoy intimacy with God, who is able to speak these truths into your life, even as you sort of almost rebel against what he's saying and have a conversation over the course of your lifetime, potentially, about what he says about you in his word.
We very much hope you're enjoying this Living Out podcast. If you appreciate what we do on the website, through our events and so on, and you would like to support us financially or in prayer, please do check out the details on the Living Out website. Thank you so much.
It was really interesting. I was up at the Keswick Convention doing a series of seminars on the intimacy deficit, which I think are available in the show notes. But I got quite a lot of pushback on this whole idea of intimacy with yourself, and some people sort of feeling that it's quite wrong to actually spend so much time thinking about yourself, or just picking up on some of what Andrew said a few moments ago. This idea that you might, be wanting to develop a strong sense of who you are and your gifts and your strengths. And have a positive view of yourself. Some people in the audience thought it was, potentially drifting in a little bit of an unChristian direction, a wrong direction. Any sort of responses you'd make to sort of people who are listening, who are thinking similar things?
I feel like the two aren't mutually exclusive. And actually, I feel like the two help each other. I think as I am able to reflect on who I am, who God's made me to be comfortable with that, to see many facets of who I am for which I can be thankful to him, it then causes me to look back to him. Because actually the reason I have strengths and giftings, the reasons I have things I can be thankful for, is because they've been given to me by him. And so actually by, as it were, looking at myself or becoming comfortable with myself, that causes me to go back and worship. And of course on the flip side, actually if I was to live a life not being comfortable with myself and never seeking to grow to be comfortable with that and to overcome some of the lies that can easily plague me about myself from my background, things people say, the culture around me and stuff, if anything, that's likely to make me, even subconsciously, like to make me resent actually who God's made me to be, which is the opposite in a sense of giving him glory. So I don't think seeking to cultivate intimacy with yourself detracts from intimacy with God or giving glory to God, which is what the whole purpose of our lives should be. I think it becomes part of it, actually. It becomes one of the many different things we do and cultivate which enable us to live a life where our whole heart orientation, our whole self-orientation is towards glorifying God.
It is just this idea, isn't it, that it's this wonderful idea, isn't it, that actually when we are most the people that God's created us to be, when we're most bearing his image and we're most using the gifts and the strengths and the weaknesses he's given us to glorify him, that's when we're most fully alive, and that's when we most bring glory to him. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, we've been talking about intimacy with yourself. What have been the blockers to intimacy with yourself in your life? What are the things that stopped you enjoying this, Jeanette?
I mean, I have to say nurture. I grew up, my parents were in the war, and that deeply affected them. According to my aunts and uncles, that, they were jolly, they were young. My father was shot at 18, watched his best friend die next to him, and he came back shut down. And that was the nurture of my house. We that I lived in. You never said anything negative. You never shared your feelings. The only things you could really share were positive things. And I remember years later I was talking, and the most negative thing I could feel was disappointment. I had no other worse feelings than that. Now that's not because I didn't go through a lot, but I couldn't name it and claim it. I just reacted however, shut down or anything like that. So nurture did have a lot. The time when I grew up, because I'm significant, I'm two generations away from you. You didn't talk about it. You just got on and lived life. There was no how are you feeling? Well, you were to say fine, thank you. You were not to share the depths of your heart. So life has changed an awful lot. But that certainly narrowed intimacy with myself and, of course, fed into a stranger to myself.
And that's a really striking phrase, isn't it? Of, that being a stranger to yourself, which is sadly been true of a lot of people in every generation, but particularly perhaps in generations past when people weren't ever given feedback or appraisals never happened at work, or you weren't encouraged to say to people, you're really good at that. Everybody was somehow expected to know themselves without any help.
Yeah, and also it's like, we're not making you big-headed here. Yeah. So they went from 0 to 100. It's like, no, you stay in your place. If I encourage you, you'll get thoughts above your station, quite frankly. Yeah.
And it's really interesting that that's obviously a generational thing in the UK, but also I wonder whether that lasted longer in Christian churches, that sort of approach, than it did in the wider culture because of what we've just been talking about. And Andrew, what have been the blockers for you?
I think, some of that resonates with me. I think the idea of being a stranger to yourself resonates with me. And I think often that's been because I haven't taken the time to get to know myself and reflect on myself, which probably has been because subconsciously I've not liked myself and so not wanted to. I think actually sometimes it's a scary thing to actually think about, who am I? What am I like? How do I feel about myself? And that can be a terrifying question actually for people to ask. How do I actually feel about myself? And I think for years I didn't, and I think it was only the grace of God through difficult and painful circumstances actually that I ended up kind of having to do that. And then I think I discovered lots of things that were blocking my experience of intimacy with myself, which were basically lies I was believing about myself or kind of misperceptions I had of myself, which I think creeping through background, upbringing, all kinds of different experiences we have, culture. But a big one I'm realizing more and more has impacted me is comparison, and how for whatever reason it's just so easy to compare ourselves to others and then to deem that something is better than another. A type of person or a type of body or type of skill or ability is better than others, which I guess is probably often shaped by those things like culture, upbringing and stuff, but can just be, random choice. And just realizing how deadly comparison is basically, and how so much of my lack of intimacy in myself and my discomfort with myself has been because of comparison, and then always with the assumption that what other people have or how other people are is better than me. And I just realised, how ingrained that I guess is in me as often a precognitive or subconscious kind of thing that I do, which then impacts on I think of myself. And what's then helped me on the flip side is beginning to realise that, so actually I can spot that happening and choose what I do with that, rather than just be, I guess, going with the flow of what's happening.
And it's really interesting, the comparison game that I think does undermine intimacy with ourselves. And just the example you've used of, often it's a cultural comparison, your body needs to look like this. But actually we had interesting conversations, again, actually at the Keswick Convention, around how within Christian communities there can also be the ideal couple or the ideal person in church. And we compare ourselves with, the people at church that seem to be the most godly Christians, and we have our own sort of false images, even in our church communities, of this is what it would be like to be a really committed Christian, and we're always comparing ourselves with somebody. It might be the billboard, it might actually just be that seemingly perfect couple at church or that perfect person in that ministry area we're involved in. Okay, those have been the blockers to intimacy. What have the catalysts been for intimacy with yourself, growing an appreciation of who God's made you to be, with the strengths, the weaknesses that He's gifted you with? What have been the catalysts in your life, Jeanette?
I think the 3 years I spent in a house share in America, in California, where it's like, how do you feel? How are you? What, and I was in this house share, and every Wednesday we had a house meeting in the evening. And I remember the first week, the leader said, "And how are you, Jeanette?" And I went, "It's none of your business how I am." So that didn't bode well for the whole year. The whole point was getting to know oneself and the Lord. But forced intimacy for me, forced sharing. And we used to, once a month, we had to go round this group and say what we liked about each other. And it's like nothing really right now, and also to receive that actually was incredibly hard, to go round this group and people saying, "I like this about you." And to actually receive and retain that instead of an automatic Teflon deflection to it. So it's these 3 years. The first 18 months was unbelievably difficult, with some nice bits in it, but it truly was like scraping my innards out in public. And but the second 18 months was the value of deep friendships, the value of knowing and being known, and that was okay. To be known was okay. So it was, it was like this fast track of everything I should have known for the previous 30 years was fast tracked and done in me. Sadly, I don't have those kind of relationships at the moment, simply because I think, well, God seems to move my friends to different continents or move me to a different continent or whatever. So when I have established that they've kind of been moved on, but that 3-year period was incredible.
So if I can say, it's really interesting to hear you say that in some ways the two big catalysts for you of intimacy with yourself have been intimacy with God, him speaking to your life through his word, and intimacy with others, other people speaking what they see in you to you. So it's been conversations with God, conversation with other people that have helped you slowly, painfully really get to know yourself and who God's made you to be. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think in your book you talk about community, don't you?
Yeah.
That we do get within community, we get to know our strengths and weaknesses far better. And yes, I hadn't thought of it like that, but you're right. The external voices speaking into my internal narrative and challenging that has been the big growth area. Yeah.
And listener, if you can't move to California and do a house share, there are other ways of having this experience. Because I mean, it's interesting you said about, and I think talk about this in the book of, actually having conversations. We had one in our small group where we went around the circle and we said, what do we most appreciate about each other? And we were a group of English people, and it was excruciatingly embarrassing. And some people had to sort of look out the window while it took place, but it was a lovely thing to do.
Yeah, can't we write notes and just pass?
Yes, can we write notes? And actually, can we write notes and burn them before we read them? Because that would make it all very easy.
Yeah. Can we do this remotely and just yell at each other? Yeah, it was excruciating, but my word, how value it was. Yeah.
Yeah. So we actually, turns out, as English, don't like admitting that we sometimes have things to learn from Americans, but this might be something that we have got to learn from Americans.
You speak for yourself, love.
Thanks, Jeanette. Okay, Andrew, what are the catalysts for intimacy with yourself been in your life?
I really am. I resonate with a lot of what you guys just said. I think, unsurprisingly, it's the opposite of what's been the hindered intimacy of myself. And so I think just being deliberate about reflecting on myself, asking that scary question of who am I, what am I like, and what do I actually feel about myself, and through that actually becoming aware of the really unhelpful views I had of myself, the lies I believed about myself, and then being proactive about that and realizing actually that it doesn't mean that because you notice something instantly changes, but like we said earlier about the book in general, these things take time and active steps to seek to grow into a healthier intimacy with yourself. And definitely I would say for me, part of that journey has been then the input of others. And I think some of the stuff I've worked through about intimacy myself, my own self-perception, self-conception, I think God has hugely used the input of other people to help dislodge some of that. Even I'd almost say it's been absolutely necessary. And just like, I've often shared my story of one of my big issues as being believing I'm a freak and a weirdo. And I still remember the first time I confessed to a friend that that's really what I believe myself. And I remember how genuine her utter bafflement was. And still, that's really helpful to me to think, actually, no, her response was so raw, so real, so honest, and she was so baffled by it that it really makes me realize, oh, people don't actually instinctively think this. And so God's just showing me how, vital others being involved in that process is. Which is often how he loves to work, and he loves to do his work through the people around us as well. And so that kind of input from others, hearing what other people think, and me being honest with others such that I can receive that back is really helpful. And I've even experienced sometimes just confessing to a trusted friend some of the lies I'm believing myself or the negative views I'm having of myself. Even just that thing of externalizing it and saying it has often broken some of the power as well. And then being a catalyst to make way, I guess, for intimacy with myself.
Oh, this is beautiful stuff, and I want to continue this conversation, but I think we've probably basically come to the end of it already. We've already used our time. It's been so helpful to talk to two dear friends about this and about intimacy yourself, and just to hear again and how intimacy with ourselves and a better understanding, appreciation of who we are, who God's created us to be in all our glory and our mess comes from actually conversation with God, hearing him speak his truth into our lives, and actually conversations with friends, hearing them speak the truth into our lives too. That's been a massive encouragement for me, just to have that sort of reaffirmed in this conversation. I hope, dear listeners, that's an encouragement to you too. I want to thank Andrew and Jeanette for reading the book in a sort of voluntary way, for being part of this conversation. You'll find some resources in the show notes. There'll be a link to buy the book if you want to buy it for yourself. There'll be a link to the Keswick talk that I did on intimacy with yourself. Thank you so much for joining us. Do subscribe, share, rate our podcast, and do come back for our next episode when we'll be talking about intimacy with others. Bye for now.